Welcome back to Revise and Resubmit. I'm Pavlov, and today we're diving into something a little unsettling, but it's really important for any organization that relies on experts. We're looking at how not to organize those experts and using the Boeing 737 MAX issues as a cautionary tale.
Yeah, it's easy to assume that if you've got a bunch of brilliant people on your team, that success is pretty much guaranteed, right? But the way you structure and manage that expertise can be the difference between, hitting your targets and facing some pretty serious consequences.
Exactly. So to guide us through this deep dive, we're turning to an article from MIT Sloan Management Review. It's an FT50 journal, so we know it's a reputable source. And this is by Pedro Monteiro. He's an assistant professor at Copenhagen Business School.
Oh, very cool.
And he really digs deep into this issue.
Yeah, and the title of the article is really blunt. How Not to Organize In-House Experts, Lessons from Boeing. It's fascinating because it kind of challenges our assumptions, right? That the 737 MAX troubles were just because of bad strategy, or cutting corners, or even just a lack of expertise.
Yeah, initially I thought it must have been, one of those things. But Monteiro's research points to something much more fundamental, the organizational structure itself.
Yeah, and that's where it gets really interesting for all of us. This isn't just a Boeing problem, right? This is something that any organization with in-house experts needs to think about. Because how you organize those experts can either help them or it can completely undermine them.
Okay, let's unpack this organizational structure issue. You mentioned that the article uses Boeing as a case study. So what exactly happened there?
Well, the article talks about how the initial assumptions about what went wrong at Boeing, they actually differed from what deeper investigations found, especially the ones the FAA did.
Oh, interesting. So what did those investigations reveal?
Well, they found that Boeing's organizational structure was flawed, and it was flawed in a way that actually prevented them from using their own expertise effectively. So, for example, certain types of expertise weren't valued enough, and there wasn't a good system for, knowledge sharing or mentoring. And in some cases, really crucial experts, like the ones who specialize in human factors, they were actually isolated from key decision-making processes.
Isolated? That seems counterintuitive, especially when we're talking about something as important as, aircraft safety.
You would think so, right? And that's exactly the point that Monteiro is making. The organizational structure didn't allow expertise to be integrated into the decision-making process. And the FAA investigation even found that there wasn't consistent monitoring of the expertise levels within Boeing's workforce. And that meant that you could potentially have underqualified people in safety-critical roles.
Wow, that's a pretty significant oversight with, potentially disastrous consequences. So how does something as seemingly abstract as organizational structure actually impact expertise in a practical way?
Well, think of it this way. The organizational structure is like the framework. That defines roles, responsibilities, and how people are grouped together. Ideally, this framework should make it easier for people with similar expertise to connect and to learn from each other and, further develop their knowledge.
So it's like creating an environment where expertise can thrive.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But in Boeing's case, the structure did the opposite. It scattered experts around, which made it really hard for them to share knowledge or to mentor each other. And this lack of connection, it wasn't just a matter of inefficiency, it actually had direct implications for safety. The FAA found that during the 737 MAX design, technical assessments were fragmented. They were incremental rather than holistic, which is, not ideal when you're dealing with complex systems.
Yeah, so instead of having a comprehensive understanding of the system as a whole, you've got these siloed bits of information. And that can be a recipe for disaster, especially in aerospace. This raises a really important question for me. What about the leadership at Boeing? Do they not see these issues?
Well, this is where the article takes another interesting turn. Monteiro observed that after Boeing merged with McDonnell Douglas, there seemed to be a shift in leadership, like a move away from deep technical expertise and towards more of a focus on financial backgrounds.
So was this shift in priorities a contributing factor to the issues with the 737 MAX?
It's hard to say for certain, but Monteiro suggests that prioritizing financial engineering over aerospace engineering could have influenced how risks were assessed, including the risk associated with outsourcing. Because remember, a big chunk of the 737 MAX production was outsourced. So relying on the expertise of those external partners added another layer of complexity.
And that leads us back to the core message, right? Having experts isn't enough. You need a structure that empowers them, that allows for collaboration, and that ensures that their expertise is informing those critical decisions.
Absolutely. It's about creating an ecosystem where talent can flourish and contribute effectively. And as we'll discuss further, Monteiro offers some really insightful recommendations for how organizations can do this. But first, we need to understand how the undervaluation of expertise played a role in the Boeing case.
Okay, let's dive into that. What types of expertise were being overlooked?
The article points out that Boeing's structure didn't adequately recognize or value a few key types of expertise. First, there was a lack of appreciation for expertise. That could oversee entire processes from start to finish. This kind of holistic understanding is so essential for identifying potential risks and ensuring a smooth workflow.
It's like having someone who can see the forest for the trees. Someone who understands how all the individual pieces fit together to create the bigger picture.
Exactly. And the second type of expertise that was undervalued was the deep technical knowledge needed to make informed decisions. It's not enough to just have managers who can delegate tasks. They also need to have a certain level of technical understanding so they can effectively evaluate recommendations from the experts and make sound judgments.
It sounds like there was a disconnect between the people making the decisions and the people with the actual technical knowledge needed to inform those decisions.
Right. And the article gives a very specific example of this. During the design of the 737 MAX, the technical assessments were, as I mentioned earlier, fragmented and incremental. And this suggests that there wasn't a strong emphasis on having experts who could look at the system as a whole and identify potential issues before they became big problems.
So it's almost like they were putting out small fires without addressing the underlying cause of the fire, which in this case was this structural issue within the organization itself.
That's a great way to put it. And this brings us to a crucial point. The way you structure your organization can either amplify or diminish the value of expertise.
And in Boeing's case, it seems like the structure was actually working against the experts.
That's right. And to understand how to avoid this pitfall, we need to look more closely at the recommendations that Monteiro provides.
Okay, I'm ready to delve into those recommendations. Let's start with the first one. What does Monteiro suggest?
Well, the first recommendation is all about finding a good balance between specialization and collaboration.
That makes sense. You need folks who can go deep, in specific areas, but they also need to be able to work together and share what they know.
Exactly. Monteiro points out that organizations often really emphasize that cross-disciplinary collaboration, which is important, but sometimes they kind of forget about the need to cultivate and maintain deep specialized expertise as well.
So how can organizations achieve that balance?
One suggestion is to create, communities of practice or networks for experts in similar fields. This gives them a chance to connect with their peers, exchange insights, and, stay sharp, even if they're working on different projects or in different departments.
I love that idea. It's like a dedicated space for them to nerd out together.
Exactly. Another important thing Monteiro brings up is the importance of consistency in how expertise is labeled and discussed within the organization. Having a shared vocabulary makes it much easier for people to identify and connect with colleagues who have similar skills.
That seems so obvious, but I bet it's something that gets overlooked surprisingly often.
It happens more than you might think, especially as companies grow and become more complex. But having those clear, consistent labels for different types of expertise can make a huge difference in how effectively that expertise is utilized.
That makes a lot of sense.
Sure.
Okay, so what's the second recommendation?
This one is about recognizing that expertise. Goes beyond job titles.
That's interesting. I mean, someone's official title might not fully capture, the depth and breadth of their knowledge and skills.
Exactly. Monteiro argues that we need to move beyond those traditional job titles and departmental silos if we really want to accurately map, the evolving knowledge landscape within an organization. We need a more nuanced understanding of who knows what.
So what strategies does he suggest for doing that?
He mentions using tools like skills directories and dashboards, which can be really helpful for tracking and visualizing the expertise within an organization. But he also makes it clear that these tools by themselves aren't enough. We also need skilled humans who can interpret the data and make good decisions based on it.
So it's not just about collecting the information, it's also about knowing how to use it effectively.
Exactly. Managers need to have the expertise to assess skills accurately and match those skills to the right tasks. They need to understand the nuances of expertise and be able to weigh the organization's needs against the available skill sets.
That sounds like a pretty demanding role for managers. Not only do they need to manage people, but they also need to have this deep understanding of all these different types of expertise within their teams.
It is demanding. But it's crucial if you want to create an environment where expertise can be fully leveraged. It's not just about finding the person with the most impressive resume. It's about understanding the context, the specific needs of a project, and how those different types of expertise can work together to achieve a goal.
It's a much more strategic approach to managing talent. So what's the third recommendation?
This one focuses on promoting a broader spectrum of expertise.
What does he mean by that?
Well, Monteiro argues that traditional organizational structures often prioritize highly specialized technical knowledge. And while that's important, it often comes at the expense of other valuable forms of expertise.
Like what kinds of expertise?
He specifically mentions what he calls connector experts. Those are the people who bridge silos and facilitate collaboration between different teams or departments, like liaisons, coordinators, or product manager.
So these are the folks who make sure everyone's on the same page, and that information's flowing smoothly between different departments.
Exactly. And while their contributions are essential, they often get overlooked in traditional organizational structures. Their work might not fit neatly into any one department, so they can end up falling through the cracks.
They're like the unsung heroes working behind the scenes to make sure the whole organization functions smoothly.
That's a great way to put it. And Monteiro argues that these connector experts need to be recognized and given defined roles and career paths.
If you want to attract and retain great people, you need to value and reward all types of expertise, including those that facilitate collaboration and knowledge sharing.
Absolutely. Another type of expertise he highlights is what he calls holistic knowledge. These are the people who have expertise that spans multiple areas.
So these are like the big picture thinkers, the ones who can see how everything fits together and then propose solutions that address system-wide challenges.
Exactly. These individuals can be incredibly valuable, but their expertise might not align with a specific department or job title. So they can also end up being undervalued and underutilized.
So what does Monteiro suggest as a solution for that?
He encourages organizations to rethink how expertise is organized and labeled. This might involve creating new job titles, restructuring departments, or simply adopting a more inclusive approach to classifying expertise.
It's about adapting the organizational structure to fit the expertise.
Yeah.
Rather than trying to force expertise into those pre-existing boxes. That might not be a good fit.
Exactly. Now, the fourth and final recommendation really focuses on leadership.
Leadership. I have a feeling this is where the rubber meets the road. You can have the most talented experts in the world, but if the leadership isn't on board and doesn't understand how to leverage that expertise, it's all for nothing.
You hit the nail on the head. Monteiro argues that domain expertise needs to be an element of leadership, especially in industries where technical knowledge is mission critical.
So you're saying that leaders need to have at least some understanding of the technical aspects of the business.
They don't necessarily need to be technical experts themselves, but they need enough familiarity to understand and appreciate the perspectives of the experts they're leading, like a baseline level of technical literacy.
Okay, so how can organizations make sure that their leaders have that baseline level of technical understanding?
Monteiro suggests integrating domain expertise into leadership development programs. So instead of just focusing on, general management skills, these programs would also give leaders opportunities to stay up to date on technical advancements and to connect with and learn from technical experts within the organization.
That makes a lot of sense. Are there other ways to bridge that gap between leadership and technical expertise?
Yeah, mentorship programs and cross-functional training can be really valuable for fostering mutual understanding and respect between leaders and technical experts.
So it's all about breaking down those silos and creating more opportunities for interaction and knowledge sharing between different groups within the organization.
Exactly. Monteiro also suggests considering things like the strategic redeployment of experts within the organization, or actively cultivating leaders from within technical functions. These approaches help to ensure that technical expertise is represented at all levels of leadership, which can help prevent that dangerous disconnect between decision makers and the people who have the deep knowledge that's needed to inform those decisions.
Those are all really interesting recommendations. It's not just about attracting talent. It's about creating an organizational culture that values and nurtures expertise at all levels.
You got it. And Monteiro emphasizes one more crucial point: the importance of humility in leadership.
Oh, that's interesting. Why is humility so important in this context?
Well, even leaders with strong technical backgrounds need to acknowledge that they don't know everything. Humility creates an environment where collaboration and knowledge sharing can flourish. When leaders are willing to admit they don't have all the answers, It encourages others to speak up, share their perspectives, and contribute to finding the best solutions.
Humility fosters psychological safety, which in turn can lead to more open communication and innovation.
Exactly. And this principle applies to all sorts of experts, not just engineers and scientists. Think lawyers, technicians, HR analysts, software developers, sustainability specialists, and so on.
It's about recognizing that expertise in all its diverse forms is a valuable asset. That needs to be managed effectively if an organization wants to thrive.
And as the Boeing case so clearly shows, the consequences of getting it wrong can be devastating.
That's a sobering thought. So let's shift gears a bit and talk about how we can apply these insights to our own lives.
I think the key takeaway here is that it's not enough to simply have experts on your team. You need to cultivate a culture where expertise is truly valued, nurtured and integrated into decision-making at all levels.
I like that. I think that's a great way to put it. So on that note, I think it's time to wrap things up for today. But before we go, what are some parting thoughts that our listeners can take away from this deep dive? I mean, for our listeners out there, think about your own organizations. Are your experts set up for success? Are they able to, share their knowledge freely? Do they feel valued and heard? Those are some pretty crucial questions to ask. And I think Monteiro's research provides a really solid framework for starting that conversation.
It really does. I think this whole deep dive has given us a lot to consider. Especially if we want to create organizations that are truly able to harness the power of expertise.
Yeah, you've given us some really valuable insights today. I especially like that emphasis on recognizing and valuing a broader spectrum of expertise. It's not just about the technical experts, right? It's also about the connectors, the holistic thinkers, all those who contribute to making sure the whole system runs smoothly.
I agree. And it's not just about having those experts, but it's about, creating an environment where they can thrive.
Yeah.
Where their knowledge is respected, shared, and integrated into decision-making at all levels.
It's about building that culture of expertise. And as we've seen, that starts with the organizational structure itself.
Absolutely. It's about designing those systems and processes that make it easier to communicate and collaborate and share knowledge. And it's about making sure that expertise is not just present, but that it's actively sought out and utilized and valued.
This deep dive has been incredibly insightful. It's definitely given me a lot to think about in terms of how we can better leverage expertise in our own organization.
Me too, and I hope our listeners are feeling the same way.
Yeah, we'd love to hear your thoughts on this episode. What resonated with you? What insights did you gain? Connect with us on social media or leave a comment on our website.
Yeah, and if you enjoyed this deep dive, please do us a huge favor. Subscribe to Revise and Resubmit on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And if you're feeling the love, give us a 5-star rating. It really helps other curious minds like yours find the show.
Yeah. Thanks for listening, everyone. Until next time, keep revising and resubmitting those ideas.